The Michael Horan House is a 2.5-story wood-frame Victorian residence constructed in 1899 on the north side of the Wenatchee River, settled near the confluence of the Columbia. According to the National Register of Historic Places, the property is one of the best preserved Victorian residences in the region. While not many of the original artifacts of the home remain, the interior of the Horan House features a typical Victorian floor plan, with areas of the home remodeled to accommodate the restaurant located at the house since the 1980s. The Michael Horan House is historically significant for its association with a pioneer Wenatchee Valley rancher, orchardist, businessman, and civic leader. Horan, who lived in the valley in 1889, established the town's first butcher shop, helped form the first bank, developed a leading livestock ranch and orchard, served on the initial and subsequent city councils, and was named the first national apple king. Born in Stockbridge, Massachusetts in 1854, Horan traveled west in 1876 after his Irish immigrant parents died. Horan moved to the region from California in 1884, establishing a butcher shop in Roslyn and marrying his wife Margaret Rankin of Gle in 1888. By that time, the town of Wenatchee had been laid out along today's Miller Avenue. Arriving in 1889, Mike and Margaret Horan were the 12th family, and the meat market Horan opened was the 5th commercial enterprise in town. In the 1890s, the promise of a rail connection set off a boom in the region. According to a local historian who knew him, Horan was, quote, in on the planning of most of all the principal developments in early Wenatchee, unquote, during these formative years. In 1890, he was elected Kittitas County Commissioner, served as a county school director for many years, founded and was an original trustee of the town's first fraternal organization, the Junior Order of United American Mechanics. In March of 1892, Horan was elected chairman of a large public rally that voted to exclude Chinese from the Wenatchee area by, quote, honorable, legal, and lawful means, unquote. At the meeting, Horan was put in charge of implementing exclusion plans and stood his ground when questioned. In December of 1892, shortly after the city was incorporated, voters elected Horan to the town's first city council. In addition to his political involvement, Horan had a varied business career in Wenatchee. For the first few years, the Horans lived in the Miller log cabin until the Horan House was completed at the turn of the century. Horan's business expanded to fruit growing with a 23-acre orchard, and his pear orchard was considered the largest in the valley at the time. Horan helped organize and serve as a president of the Washington State Horticultural Association in 1901, with the valley following Horan's lead in orchard practices. Mike Horan died in 1919 with more than 800 mourners attending his funeral at the Masonic Temple and over 50 floral displays placed at his grave. Following Horan's death, the house and ranch were owned by his sons John and Walter. John Horan remained actively involved in orchard operations, as did his children and grandchildren. Walt Horan went on to serve as a U.S. Congressman. The Horan House was included on the National Register of Historic Places in the 1990s. Nevio Tontini purchased the Horan property in the early 2000s, hoping to turn it into a bed and breakfast, but the fate remains uncertain.
I'm Nevio Tontini. We're at the Horan House, which I purchased in 2006. I grew up in Southern California, in Riverside, California, and migrated to San Francisco while going to college. I became a child psychologist down there and worked with abused kids for a number of years. Finally burned out and needed a change in life and moved up here and became a builder. I loved the look of the house. I mean, it was a nice piece of property when I bought it. Still from the restaurant days, I'd been out here at the restaurant several times. But I'm a builder, and to me there was 2+ acres of land, so I had lots of thoughts of doing things with it. Possibly doing a B&B or an event center or other development. And as it turned out, nothing has happened over the years. I had a caretaker staying here watching the property, and that's where we're at. I always love the setting down here. I love to listen to the geese fly through. I've seen deer here. It's a pretty setting. You get noise from the highway up above, but other than that, it's very tranquil down here.
As he worked to maintain the Horan House, Tontini says he knew Mike Horan's legacy was significant in the Wenatchee Valley.
Apparently, he was a go-getter. He'd moved around quite a bit to different areas. I think he lived in Roslyn for a while, moved here. He was very well known for his methods of farming apples. There were no relics from that era still here other than the house itself. I love the gingerbread on the outside. Being a former carpenter, I marvel at the kinds of things they were able to do during that era with no electrical power. So I think a lot of that is something that's precious to me. When my former tenant, former carpenter, who was here as a caretaker, was here, he kind of got a little wild with some of the paints, trying to replicate the era. So you'll see that as we go through the house. Yeah, the wallpapers are, very historic, I guess. But and the windows have been taken out. They have an asbestos glaze on them. So I've had the asbestos guys in here looking at what needs to be done. But it's been about a 3-year period where I've been discussing moving the house with one lady here in town who owns a B&B, a historical type B&B, and she has some property on Easy Street, and we just haven't been able to come to terms. The money isn't there for the kind of thing she wants done. I've met with Rory Turner and different groups about possibly moving the house, and I don't think that's going anywhere either at this time. I think if somebody has the money to try and restore it, I think it would be very worthwhile. The movers say it is movable. It's pretty spendy, but is movable. They'd have to cut off a section of the house to move it up the streets, and someone would have to provide a foundation to set it on, and then another $200,000 to $300,000 after that to do restoration. And if someone has that kind of desire, I hope they step forward.
Time to save the property is running out as Tontini begins to consider demolition.
I don't think I ever thought truly of putting in the kind of money it would take to restore this property to be habitable and to be worthwhile to the community. I'm more of a builder. I look at the land. I see the land's value. I see the possibility of condos down here, very nice quiet area. I guess if I can't get it moved, which it seems like I can't at this point, then my next step is to go through a demolition phase and to sell the property. I hate being seen as a bad guy if the house gets torn down. I think that everything has its time. Like me, time is getting short.
Up next, we'll talk with Rory Turner, who took a special interest in helping attempt to save the historic home, along with several locals who cherish their memories with the property. Rory Turner, a commissioner with the Chelan County Port District who works in historic renovation, got involved in trying to save the Horan House from demolition because of its local historical significance.
It's really at a tipping point. It either needs to be, moved or restored immediately because it's open to the elements now and it's really deteriorating pretty rapidly. So, we may have another week or two, but that's about it. I guess the passion that I have is for older buildings, regardless of what they are and what shape they're in. And I think they're time capsules to the past. And so once you lose them for good. And so that's driven me, since I was, actually quite young and involved in this. And so I've been doing this for a long time. I've been aware of the Horan House for a lot of years. When we first came to town, we had dinner out there. We moved here in the mid-90s, and it's just an extraordinary location. And historically, it's very important. You can just imagine, built in the late 1800s, and that's a striking building at the time. Imagine that, and the gathering of different people. I would assume that governors passing through the area would meet at their house. You can just imagine how elegant that would have been in the 1800s and early 1900s. So historically, it has great importance. And beyond that, it's just a beautiful home. And you look past the cobwebs now and the broken windows, and if you can imagine what it was like back then. So I don't have any direct economic connection with this at all. I've no skin in the game, if you will. There's nothing that I have other than I just wanted to take one last shot at perhaps saving this. I wasn't aware that it was going to be torn down. Nevio is a great guy and has tried to do something with it for the last several years. Right now, the Chelan County PUD is in the process of acquiring around 20 acres to ultimately, they're considering moving their headquarters out there, or a portion of it. I don't think any decisions have been made, but they needed to create the opportunity for themselves to expand in a more centrally located area, because they service the entire county, right? So it made sense for them to do that. They are acquiring the piece of property that is adjacent to the Horan House. It's called the Horan Block. It used to be the orchard that was attached with it. The PUD would like to acquire this piece from Nevio as well. And certainly in his rights, he's gone through the Historic Preservation Board, and they've given it a ruling of non-significant significance at this point. And so it's really, Nevio's being very patient right now. He's got the go-ahead to demo it or do whatever he needs to do, but he's been gracious enough to give us some time to work on this. So I don't really have a role per se. Nevio and I have known each other for a number of years. He's just a wonderful, great guy, and he's got a great story. But I just stepped up and said, maybe I can help here. And so I've reached out, to Washington Trust for Historic Preservation and Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation that both support the saving of this. But since I first got involved in this, the bottom line is, if we don't have an ultimate use for this, a location for it perhaps, or a use on site that could provide us a stream of income or revenue, or be something that the public could use and value, if we don't have that, if we don't have a use for it, then, like any building at some point in time, particularly a wooden structure that was constructed without the benefits of, pressurized treated timber and things like that back in the 1800s, at some point in time, there's a tipping point where it's just not valuable anymore, other than the emotional value of having it. So I think we're there. And we haven't been able to come up with an ultimate use. And there has been a lot of interest, a lot of community interest, a lot of, people say, hey, you need a check, let me know. But if we don't have a use for it, then it just, it's just a building, I guess, at that point in time. And if we would have started maybe a couple of years ago, I would say that the opportunity to succeed would have been a little greater. But, I didn't address it, and, my bad. When you say, how much is it going to cost you to move it, how far are you going to move it? And there's a piece of property not very far away that if we were able to use it and then haul it across the field, we could get that done for, probably $50,000, and put a fence around it and hang on to it for a few more years. But are we just delaying the inevitable? And once you move it, and my understanding is you got a chance to go out and see the building, and you saw the basement, and the foundation on this is stone foundation, and with a bunch of additions. And so, it's funky, and it's going to be a challenge to move it. It can be done. It definitely can be done. But if you don't have that use, then what's the point of doing it? So that's where I have to be a realist. I work on a lot of buildings. We probably own 12 different buildings in these 3 counties, and it's nice to start with a brick building, because it's a little more solid. The wood frame from the late 1800s, it's got some issues. I'll be sorry to see it go away. I won't be there when they tear it down if it gets torn down. It's not really emotional, but it's like, doggone it, I wish I would have taken on this project a couple of years ago, because I think I could have done something else. So I'm going to look at it personally as a little bit of a loss. Other than that, I just appreciate everybody's cooperation on this. And the city's been great, tried to come up with some potential solutions. I just don't think we've had enough time to do it, unfortunately. And again, the parks, we were able to sit down with those guys, and they were, they're very positive, and again, given time, I think there might have been something there somehow, some way. But it's just we've run out of time, so that's unfortunate.
Up next, locals share their memories of the Horan House, including the great-granddaughter of Mike and Margaret Horan. Denise Brown Fritz, great-granddaughter to Mike and Margaret Horan, shares some of her favorite memories of the Horan House.
I'm Denise Brown Fritz. I'm the daughter of Patricia Horan Wallen, who's passed away, and she was born and raised in that home. My grandmother was Helen, and married to John, and she was the last Horan to live in the house. The McDougals did live there for a while my Uncle Bob was my grandma had moved to town. It was just such a big house to rattle around in for one little lady, and she was all of 4.5 feet tall. And so she moved to town and they moved in. He was in the legislature at that time, and that's when the McDougals lived there. It was heaven back in the day. We had the best Thanksgivings. And family would come from all over the state. It was a traveling event because we all got together. And it was all done right there in the dining room that doesn't look like a dining room anymore. Sliding boom de down those stairs. Golly. Oh, golly. Sitting at the kitchen table having soft-boiled eggs with my grandma. And talking. Laughing. Near the house, my grandmother had beautiful gardens. And my granddad had a stroke quite young and survived. And so one of his favorite things was to sit there in the evening at that table and watch the 4 o'clocks open. That was just the highlight of his day, was to watch them open. So much of our family, I know my mother did, I don't know about everybody else, but most of us have 4 o'clock somewhere growing that we look at and watch for him. My favorite room was my mother's bedroom, just because she talked about it really a lot and told me stories about growing up there and being in it. I have the furniture, and she always liked to tell a story on herself, so I'll tell it again on herself. That they'd swim down in the river and then come back up and hang their suits out on that railing of her little balcony. Well, she had taken it off, was stark naked, and threw it over and lost her balance and tumbled over down to the ground. And you know, that little house across the way, well, there was a lady there that worked for the family, and she, Mrs. Monroe, and Monroe and Scottish Monroe, she was Scotch. She spoke Scotch, you know, the brogue. Anyway, she came running, Patricia, are you all right? Mom's just embarrassed. That's my favorite room. It kills me that it could even begin to be destroyed. It was one of the first fine homes built in this valley, and how anybody can think that there's any rational reason to knock it down is beyond me. And I pray somebody comes along with money. Boy, do I have some ideas. It'd be the best bed and breakfast in this area, or it could be. Everything historical that remains should be preserved, because life is changing too fast, the world is changing too fast, and modern is ugly.
The Horan House was also a restaurant starting in the 1980s, well cherished by locals as a special spot on the Columbia River. But its memory lives on in the minds and stomachs of many locals.
So it was a beautiful, I think it was a June evening, and there's this big circular patio out there. So we set up out there, and I think we had under like a canopy sort of thing, but really gorgeous, really, really beautiful. And then remember about halfway through the meal, I heard a tractor start up, and they began to spray the orchard that was right next to us. And so it was like, my wife and I, we're from, Puyallup, and we come over, and it's like, what is this? And everybody just kept eating, and it's like, well, welcome to Wenatchee. This is the life we live over here with, this ag-based economy. So it was a very memorable night. Wonderful food. Just the ambiance there is just really, really cool. And then they, shortly after that, they created a little kind of a bar in the carriage house, which is another really, really cool little building.
Oh, it was a beautiful setting. It was in wonderful shape then, and it was a restaurant at the time, and immaculate. It was beautiful. I'm Sharon Beebe, and I was raised here in Wenatchee, born and raised. My husband and I, Bob, were married at the Horan House on September 29th, 1984. I've always been fascinated by old houses. In fact, if you went into my kitchen, you'd see old Victorian houses everywhere. It was really nice grounds, and we had a great day, and the blue sky and everything. It was just a unique house. It was just, it needs to be saved.
My name is Noreen Mandeville, and I'm from Chelan. We live at the Yacht Club. When I first went, it was with my boyfriend, then he became my husband, and we used to celebrate his birthdays, anniversaries, special occasions there. The food was fabulous. One of our favorite appetizers was the crabs and Parmesan stuffed mushrooms, and they were so good. They came in a special little dish for mushrooms, and the Parmesan cheese was nice and crusty over it. And one day I asked them for the recipe, and they sent it to me. And I was so surprised, so now I have that, and it's handwritten. And beautiful, beautiful old house. If you like architecture at all, or just the atmosphere was friendly. It was a place to get fabulous food, and it's a loss. We're so sad when it closed down. I know my husband, who was a critical care nurse at Central Washington, the nurses there had a couple of great parties there, birthday celebrations in the carriage house. And I think it'd be beautiful to have a wedding there. I know the wineries are doing that, but it just is a historical house in Wenatchee, and I always hate to see those go. I want it to open again.